Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar entitled Analytics with Urgency, 4 Ways Cloud and Data Governance Provide Agility Without Chaos, presented by Healthcare Innovation. My name is Mark Hagland. I'm Editor-in-Chief of Healthcare Innovation. Welcome. Today's program is sponsored by Informatica. Thank you so much to our sponsor and to you in our audience for giving us your time and attention today. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping details to share with you. To submit a question, please use the Q&A box to the left of your video window at any time. You do not have to wait until the end of the program. For technical issues, please press F5 to refresh. If that doesn't work, you can submit a question with your issue to the Q&A panel. Finally, join our webinar conversation on Twitter. You can tweet using the hashtag HILiveWebinar. Thank you. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers for today's program. First, Mike Ross, VP of Population Health and Enterprise Analytics at Ohio Health. A 20-year health IT leader and executive, Mike joined the organization in 2015 and has spent his time leading the growth of Ohio Health's Population Health Services team, as well as the Enterprise Analytics program for the organization. I'm also delighted to welcome Richard Kramer, Chief Healthcare Strategist at Informatica. Richard is a 25-year veteran of the healthcare industry, having spent time in senior technology leadership roles at the University of Pennsylvania Health System and UMass Memorial Healthcare. With that, gentlemen, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Hello and welcome to today's webinars, 4 Ways Cloud and Data Governance Provide Agility Without Chaos. My name is Richard Kramer, Chief Healthcare Strategist with Informatica, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Mike Ross, Vice President of Population Health and Enterprise Analytics for Ohio Health. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Richard. I'm excited to be here this afternoon.
We've been working with Ohio Health for several years as part of their overall data strategy. In today's conversation, Mike will share the Ohio Health data management and analytics story and how the COVID-19 crisis has changed things. From today's webinar, we hope you'll take away insights in the following areas. First, the role of enterprise data governance. Second, what foundational data management capabilities contribute to being responsive in a crisis. Third, where cloud fits in the value delivered. And lastly, what outcomes resulted from a well-executed data strategy. During our conversation, we will also highlight a bit of a before and after COVID perspective to draw out 4 real topics. What parts of Ohio Health's data strategy prepared them for responding to the crisis? What parts of the data strategy were accelerated? Which ones were de-emphasized or pushed back? And then what things that were new that came up that they hadn't necessarily thought of ahead of time? All that sound reasonable to you, Mike?
That sounds great. We've got a lot of ground to cover, and I'm excited to kick this off.
Super. Well, let's get going. And let's begin with a quick overview of Ohio Health, Mike, for people who might not be familiar with the health system.
Absolutely. Ohio Health is a nationally recognized organization based out of Columbus, Ohio. We have over 12 hospitals, 35,000 associates. We are a very large and prominent community organization and employer in Central Ohio. We have a very aggressive thought process around supporting the community, both in our population health programs and our everyday care for the community. We are very proud of our organization. We've won numerous awards around best places to work, as well as the quality that we've been able to deliver with our community.
That's excellent, Mike, and I think we'll see during today's conversation that you also are very much thought leaders in how you serve your community in some of the things that we're going to be talking about. We've mentioned a couple of times that you had a data management strategy underway for a few years. Can you provide some context to that strategy and orient us a bit to your objectives?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing I'll start off with by saying is we are a work in progress, and we have been a work in progress. And what you're looking at is just a snapshot of some of the architectural elements that we've been putting forward in our organization. For the last probably 15, 20 years, enterprise analytics has been somewhat of a lower priority for the organization. We were more responsive. We were very decentralized. We had made some investments into data warehousing platforms that weren't quite as successful as we anticipated. And over the last 4 years, we've really been revitalizing that program for Ohio Health, working with our senior leaders in the organization to really move from a responsive program to an enabling program. We, over the last 18 months, have put together a roadmap around our enterprise information strategy that really focused on a crawl, walk, run mental approach. We know we had to do a lot better job of data management and data plumbing, all the behind the scenes activities that are required to have a strong analytics program so that we can deliver insights to the organization. We knew we needed to invest in information quality and data governance tools. For our organization, data governance is a little bit of a sore subject, you could say. There were several attempts at it, several governance groups put in place, committees to talk about it. We knew we had an opportunity, but we couldn't quite figure out how to operationalize that. So in that roadmap that we focused on, we really drove home the need to invest in both tools and people to be able to provide the organization back a consistent framework around information quality. We had lots of activities in the cloud, moving our organization and our traditional data warehouses to the cloud, both from a data integration and a data platform perspective. Those are two key projects that are underway for our organization. And then on the front end, we knew that we needed to advance our tools. I sat up in front of our leaders in the organization 18 months ago and said, you know, I have a dream that analytics isn't a behind the curtain IT function. I wanted to enable all 35,000 people in the organization to be able to do analytics or to be able to use the tools that the analytics program was able to provide. And that's the journey that we've been on for the last 18 months. And when COVID hit, it certainly was a great opportunity to showcase some of the things that we have been successful at doing.
That's an excellent background, Mike, and I think it really sets the context for you were on this journey before COVID hit. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about how that prepared you for the future. And I think it's also interesting because, you know, one of the things I hear very frequently now when I talk to customers and prospects is people say to us, if it's not COVID-19 related, it's not getting funded. And certainly I think that's part of the story that you're articulating here as far as go forward. Is that a correct statement, or would you tune that?
Yeah, you know, I think there's a lot to be said about that. I think that when we're sort of through the initial scurrying around, getting organized around COVID, and we're now in a good place to take a look at what we're facing. And I think COVID has done a good job at refocusing our organization and perhaps many others. We know that we need to be very critical in our thinking around the investments that we need to make across the organization, whether that's clinical equipment or IT, and then specifically in the analytics space. And COVID's done a good job of really clearing out what I like to say, wouldn't it be nice to know versus we need to know. And that's been sort of a mantra that we've used as we've partnered with our command centers and our leaders to think about the types of investments we continue to need to make and the investments that were no longer as important for us. And certainly COVID has been at the center of that because healthcare's financial situation has changed, the economy has changed, and all those present real and important things that we need to take in consideration.
So that's a good transition, Mike, to talk about what are the things that you accelerated in your roadmap when COVID-19 hit in order to be responsive to the needs of the community in your business?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a couple of key things here, and the slide does a good job of starting me off on that. We were literally in process. We had selected our data governance tools. We were in process of installing those tools and had formed a group to start developing our use cases on which ones we were going to start deploying inside those tools. Our target, quite frankly, was the end of our fiscal year, which is the end of this June, to be able to have those first use case in play and then ramp up over our next fiscal year. When COVID hit, we had a lot of requests coming our way. We had a lot of people talking about things such as beds, ventilators, drugs, labs, tests, all key things that we needed to do to service and provide support for COVID. And we realized very, very quickly that we needed to get our hands wrapped around this. And we dramatically increased the pace of our data governance tool release. by several months just so that we could support the organization. I can recall specifically being in the command center for the first couple of weeks for organization and people asking for reports and leaders talking about data, being able to talk back to the state, report up to the governor's office, what we had in terms of capacity and beds. And it was clear we needed to get our hands wrapped around that very quickly. And that was one of our big focus areas to establish and leverage the tools that we'd invested in to be able to promote that faster. And as somebody once said to me, never let a good crisis go to waste. And so I couldn't have imagined a faster adoption than what we've been able to successfully do with this. One of the other areas that we had been on a journey on was, what are we doing in data science, advanced analytics, predictive modeling, AI? And while that was on our roadmap to start to form that team, bring in decentralized resources that had the skill sets, we quickly realized we needed to do that right away. So we took our data scientists that were spread throughout the organization, formed them into a cohesive group, provided a single leader and direction for that group, and had them start running. They were very focused on delivering models and partnering with other healthcare organizations in Ohio to think about what is our predictive model for COVID? What are we going to look at from a census, from an admission standpoint? How can we partner with those other healthcare organizations in the governor's office to understand what the impact in Ohio is going to look like? We quickly needed to look at our supply chain and our workforce and trying to predict what we were going to need in those spaces. And so that group very much escalated and accelerated the types of products that we were able to focus on and deliver. And now that set an expectation for our organization of great things to come. I joke with my team that with great responsibility comes accountability. So now that we've set the stage for our organization and things we've done, we know we're going to have to continue to hit home runs. One of the last things that we ended up doing was really thinking about how do we decentralize product delivery. I told you the story earlier that I had sat in front of our stage and talked to all of our leaders about turning 35,000 people into analytic resources. And just the sheer volume of requests coming our way, there was no way we were going to be able to deliver that. And so we accelerated our journey of developing a community of developers. We looked around the organization, found resources that were analytically inclined, had prior experience in doing this, had an interest, had the skills, and we started to give them more access to our back-end data so that they could take metrics and data definitions and data sets that we had cleansed and organized and allowed them to start building those on their own. And we turned my team of BI developers and data visualization experts more into a community support group than an actual product delivery group. Those were some of the three things that we definitely accelerated during COVID.
And Mike, for that last one, accelerating something by 2 years is a phenomenal leap forward. Do you have any metrics in terms of how many people were using your visualizations before and how many are using them now?
Yeah, we had of our licenses probably only a couple hundred active users prior to COVID. When we started developing products and we had a community of resources developing more products, we've escalated into the thousands. We now have almost every leader in the organization leveraging some of the products in some shape or form to be able to run their business.
That's a phenomenal number really, really quickly. So those are the things that you accelerated. And now we're looking at the next 12, 18, 24 months, depending on who it is that you listen to, of operating in this crisis. So you're past this initial bolus of the crisis. What's the next 12 to 18 months look like as far as your support to the organization?
That's a really good question. It's a topic of conversation across the organization. The way we look at it and the way I look at it is we really actually still have two crises going on. We are still seeing a high census of COVID positive patients in our organization. And we are also trying to figure out how we develop a healthcare delivery model for the future. How do we get business to come back in? How do we reassure patients that they'll be safe to get those procedures? We've got a lot of concern that folks have delayed some of the things that are important for them. And we've got to find a way to run our business. So the reality is I'm still running two different crisis teams simultaneously because we don't know if a second wave could hit. We don't know when that could happen, and we need to ensure that we are providing the information and the analytics to support the organization. It's been quite a journey for us, to be quite frank, around how we do this. Our focus has been on not being a slave to the urgent. COVID has given us an opportunity to really hone in on the things that are most important for the organization. And we've been able to partner side by side with our command center leaders and our executive team and really get them to understand the difference between I need a report that shows me ventilator usage, just give it to me right now, versus having a conversation on whether or not you're going to need that in 2 months, 3 months, you're going to need it every day. Let's build something that we can reuse, because if we go through a process of just deploying one-time ad hoc requests, we're really not going to enable the organization to be able to self-service itself going forward. So we made sure that as we built the products that we've built, that all of these can be reused. All of them are the starting efforts for later reports and later analytic activities and areas. The second thing we've done is how do we support, sorry, go ahead, Richard.
I wanted to dig in a little bit to your prioritization comment, Mike, because it seems that prioritization pre-COVID versus prioritization after COVID is dramatically different. I was wondering if you could talk about that change.
Absolutely. No, I'm not proud, but we had one of those prioritization processes that linked in several business leaders. They helped us refine the hundreds of requests that we were actively managing in our queue. We had a little bit of FIFO, we had a little bit of escalation processes, and the teams worked their through and inevitably got to what was most important. When COVID hit, quite frankly, all of that went to the side, and we were able to quickly focus in on what was most important. We did a couple of things in that regard. One, we made the active requests accessible to our 2 command center leaders that were always in charge of what was happening. They knew what people were asking for. We would have daily touch bases with all of the sub-team leaders under our command center to prioritize what was the most important questions that they had or the need for information. And we kind of used this opportunity to get them to think about what was necessary versus what was nice to know. And I quite frankly, I use that phrase with them quite a bit. And when we'd have those conversations, I would say, is this necessary, absolutely critical, or is this something that's nice to know for somebody inside the organization? And we folks were able to rally around that mental thought process. And we went through a daily review of the types of requests that we were getting, whether it was reports, whether it was dashboards, whether it was data metrics, and we were able to partner alongside our command center to ultimately ensure we were focusing on the right things. And what was great is, after a couple of weeks of our command center being live, they were helping to prioritize that for me before they were hitting my team. They recognized that we had obviously a scarcity of resources, and they would come to us in our daily stand-ups and talk about, we know we need these 3 things, Mike. We think this is the most important, so we want you to focus on that, and then you let us know we can get to these other 2 items. It really became a great partnership for us.
Yeah, and that negotiation with an interested consumer of data where you can decide, how good do you want me to do it the first time, right? Do you want me to do it really well so that you can reuse it over and over, or do you just need me to do it quick and fast, right? And that negotiation, I think, is a big part of the prioritization.
Yeah, that's a great point. What was interesting is it was a great educational opportunity. Because we would talk to some of our user requests, and that was the very point of it. And they started to learn, I need this one time. It's for the governor. It's for a state agency organization. It's for somebody else. I'm not worried about it. I won't have to ask it again. Versus other ones where they would say, we think we're going to need this. Let's start with what we call our MVP around metrics, around dashboards, around reports, and then let's partner together to build out what that's going to look like over the long run. It was a great educational opportunity for our leaders.
And before we move off this topic, I mean, this all sounds like the fantastic responsiveness to quickly emerging needs from business and clinical leaders. How much of this do you think is going to persist in the future once the clarity of the crisis is past, versus will you ever go back to your prioritization of the old?
I don't think we will go back. I don't want us to go back. I know the leaders that have conversations don't want us to go back. We've been able to really improve our reputation and thus the organization's use of data and analytics. Our status reports now that go out to our our leadership and even to our board include a lot of the products that we built for our teams. The reality is, right, that there's also a financial implication for healthcare organizations like us, and that is we don't have the type of financial resources that we may have had in the past to be able to throw more bodies at a problem or to invest in significant amounts of tools to be able to get what the organization needs. We have to be very efficient with the resources that we do have, and in order to do that, that means following the management system and the management style that we've been putting in place during COVID. We know that we're successful under that. The organization has seen us be successful at that. We've been able to do a really good job of ensure a high quality of the information that we've delivered. Prior to COVID going in, we had some successes, but it was really through the first couple of weeks when we were able to deliver on some really important products. We really haven't heard a lot of complaint or grumblings or struggles with believing the information that we've been publishing. And so we've built up a great amount of momentum, and that's something that we're going to be able to leverage going forward. And I don't see us ever turning back to what it was before.
Yeah, the trust is invaluable. And I think I jumped in with a question before you were going to start talking about the role of data science as you're operating in the crisis.
Yeah, absolutely, not a problem. I think data science is one that we have definitely seen a change of, hey, that's a cool function. Hey, maybe they can do some cool things for us, maybe solve some interesting problems, to folks recognizing that this is going to be a fundamental capability that we need to have going forward. No better place than to look at supply chain and our PPE. As everybody has read and heard and participated, that's been a big opportunity and problem for every healthcare organization. We've been able to put some demand models in place that's helped our supply chain understand what we think we're going to need, both during COVID and when we're balancing COVID positive patients with normal healthcare business. That's a conversation that it probably would have taken me several behind the scene meetings and lunches to get some of our senior leaders to recognize its value. And overnight now, they're asking me, how can we accelerate the work that we're doing in our predictive models? How can we implement more from a clinical standpoint, more from an operational standpoint? How do we ensure we're maximizing the use of our workforce and scheduling that workforce? So data science has certainly gone to the forefront for our organization. And it's one of the areas that I expect and anticipate we're going to be investing in significantly.
Yeah, it's interesting that you see such clarity now in your customers as far as what a predictive model means. Because I know over the last 12, 18, 24 months where this idea of predictive modeling and next generation analytics was really starting to become a modern capability, I frequently hear from customers and prospects, we can't even do retrospective reporting on our data. We're not ready for any of that fancy predictive stuff. But everything you've described, right, brings it front and center. What is our forecast demand for ICU beds? What's our forecast demand for PPE? And knowing what it's expected to be tomorrow, 5 days, or 2 weeks out is absolutely essential for being able to actually operate in the crisis.
Yeah, absolutely, Richard. I think this is probably one of the things that we've done that I'm most proud of our organization and our team. We moved very quickly through what do we have on site, what can we do with the existing data. We had to work side by side. We put our analytic team, our supply chain team, our procurement team, and some of our clinical leaders together, and they basically sat into a room and they got to pull back the layers of the onion to really understand definitional standards across supply use, how we were counting inventory, what different inventory items meant, what was required from a clinical standpoint, and then knowing that the supply chain across the country and around the world was sort of struggling with what was necessary, we were able to make some smart decisions around our procurement to ensure that we had enough PPE for the organization and for our staff. Tremendous success in doing that. But it required a lot of work from both sides of the teams, and now we've got a roadmap for that space that I think puts us on par with the logistical company.
And the other thing that's intriguing, Mike, again, you have 35,000 employees. You're trying to get everybody to be an analyst. You didn't have a huge number of data scientists to do all of this amazing work in a short period of time. I mean, how big was the data science team when you originally sort of coalesced them into a group?
Our data science team, it was pretty interesting. We really didn't have that many resources. We started with 4, and some of those were part-time. We've now been able to move some people that had that skill set into this team, so we're up to 8. We're constantly looking for more resources, but it's been a very small group, and we've asked a lot of them, quite frankly, over the last 3 months. They've learned a lot as well about how to be efficient and effective of what they do, but our organization very much relies on them at this point.
Yeah, and it's interesting because not everybody needs to have data science skills, right? You have a small group that does the really cool, interesting stuff, collaborates, and then other people do other things. But I still think, the first time we had this conversation, just understanding what a small, cherished resource those data scientists were that were really impacting the entire organization is sort of a point to take away, because lots of organizations say, well, we don't have 4 dozen data scientists. Well, you don't need 4 dozen data scientists. Somebody once told me you actually need to have 2 so they can keep each other company, because one data scientist alone is a very lonely person. You need a lot, and I think your story really reinforces that.
I agree with that completely.
So moving on, another thing I'm hearing from people talk about, and this is you're operating in a crisis, and how do you get back to a new financial model and getting elective surgeries and other things brought in. But we hear that relationship with the patient and with the consumer is more important than it's ever been as you start thinking about who do I reach out to, how do I reach out to them, how do I categorize and segment people who are anxious to get in versus those who are reluctant to get in, and tell us how you're approaching your customer experience.
This is a great story as well, and it really, if you think about customer experience and you think about a digital engagement, we have focused in around making data a key driver into how we do that. Obviously, you'll need capabilities relative to virtual health, texting campaigns, email campaigns, patient portals, and that type of thing. Excuse me. But our focus is on how do we ensure we're connecting with the right people and at the right time and in the right priority. We had been on this journey prior to COVID, but this has dramatically accelerated some of the activities and needs that we've been able to uncover, especially as we've been opening up our healthcare organization. How do we go back and follow up with those patients who are in most need of care, whether they have chronic conditions, whether or not they have preventative screenings that they are very delayed on that we want to bring them in, whether or not they're just new patients that have something wrong with them but they're nervous to come into the organization. How do we open up our schedules? How do we open up virtual health as an augmentation to coming in for those who are uncomfortable with doing that? How do we connect with our seniors who are sometimes less comfortable with the technology side of the equation and prefer that one-on-one interactive experience? How do we make sure that the right people are using those coveted slots? We've invested quite a bit in our digital capabilities and our analytics to drive that, including focusing on building a customer 360 data repository of all the connection points that we would have with our consumers. We've even started talking about them as consumers and not as patients. Because when you look at what consumers are going to be looking for in the future, what I believe is very much a customer journey that's going to provide them retail-like experiences. Gone are the days of paper and check-ins and registration. How can we ensure that somebody can schedule on their phone immediately? If that's not available, how can they register ahead for their visit? How can they ensure that they're having that type of experience that we would look to other organizations and other industries to have? We've been investing in predictive models around which people are in most need of care. How do we define and provide standards for our customers? What are things like, what's a prospect? How would we all define a prospect in healthcare? Is that somebody who has never been seen by our organization? Is that somebody who hasn't been seen in over 18 months? Is it somebody that has chronic conditions that hasn't been seen on a sooner cadence than that? We've really invested time, both operational, clinically, and analytically, to start to build the capabilities that are going to allow us to build an engine to better engage with our customers and create an overall healthier population. It's something that our senior leaders have started to pivot towards and are starting to recognize that importance. And they've been willing to partner with us side by side to think through what some of those definitions mean, what are the priorities, and it's quite an exciting journey that we're focusing on.
So Mike, one of the things that you mentioned is that you were starting down this path before COVID hit, and you had put in place sort of a customer 360 initiative, and that's master data management of your patient population by any other name, correct?
Correct.
And what was the initial use? Go ahead.
You're going right where I was going to go.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, what was the initial use case for that master data management of patient before COVID came around?
Initially, our focus was just on ensuring we had a connection point between our digital customers and our EMR customers. We were starting relatively small, just developing the foundational footprint so that we could later expand that. We quickly realized that we needed to go faster and be more inclusive of what we're looking at from a consumer standpoint. We have service offerings in our organization that are related to insurance, related to employer services, and we quickly realized that we're going to want to include those because everything with COVID became paramount. We wanted to ensure that we had a connection point between our employer services division that was offering on-site clinics at employer offices. They had COVID positive patients, so that when that person would end up in our healthcare organization, we were able to connect them in a digital and technology way. So we've expanded the scope of our customer 360. We've accelerated the pace of which we're going to be going live with that, and we have a tremendous number of use cases that we're going to rapidly deploy once that goes live.
And one of the things that it's a truism across customer experience across every industry that a truly engaging customer experience is a personalized customer experience. And in your earlier discussion, you had mentioned the idea of capturing the interaction data with the patient, with the consumer, so that your next engagement with them could be smarter. Can you talk a little bit about that evolution to the capturing interaction data and where that fits?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we had just recently launched a patient services center, in essence, taken a call center approach and mentality so that our patients had one number to worry about when they were calling Ohio Health. What we've thought about is how do we do things like voice recognition analytics so that we can take what's actually happening on that call in real time and provide suggestions for our agents and our nurses, if they happen to be talking to nurses at the time, with directions on how to take that conversation. We also want to use that for retrospective analysis so that we know Mike called the service center to schedule an appointment or to pay a bill. He was very frustrated. He was angry. Let's flag that as an opportunity for us to follow up on. And let's ensure when the next person has a conversation, they're able to understand that there's been some history that we want to focus in on. Or if somebody has a question on our digital app where they're connecting with a care manager, they're saying they're not feeling well, they've described some symptoms of some things, they may have looked up a provider that specializes in a certain type of condition that they're experiencing. How can we immediately use that data to help inform our organization of how to ensure we're directing that person to the right place to go for care? How do we ensure that our care managers, if they're involved, are aware of that and they can re-engage with that patient? We realize that data is just as important as our EMR data, and we know that we have a long ways to go to standardize that and get that organized in a cohesive way. But as we look at taking care of that entire customer journey, it's not just about what's the clinical activities that happened to me while I was at a hospital or at a practice location. It's how am I helping to take care of my parents, my brothers, my siblings, my kids? How am I engaging with the Ohio Health brand in totality? And how do I ensure that when I call once, they knew why I called that last time? That's at the forefront of our digital experience and our customer experience strategy.
Yeah, and as we started that conversation, the idea that you had already identified Customer 360 and Master Data Management as sort of a foundational capability, but now everything that's made possible by that, and I don't expect there is a lot you described that's necessarily new, but it's probably pulled forward by, I would think, years.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. Our engineering team, sitting side by side with our analytic team, we've really leveraged cloud development capabilities and our cloud data lake to be able to drive home products and experiences at a much faster pace than we had historically been able to do. During our COVID crisis, as an example, we used our high-risk predictive model to combine with a chatbot that we engineered via some Amazon services to quickly interact with some of our patients in our web portal. This provided for us immediate and positive experiences and cut down things like direct calls to our clinical folks on what to do. And so that's just the tip of the iceberg of how we're leveraging rapid development in a cloud environment with our back-end data models.
All great stuff. So let's move on to the topic of data governance. And I'm a data guy. I see the world through a data lens, and so data and a lot of the things you're describing, I see data governance having a big role. You've called out a few times the role of data governance and people understanding the data. Can you talk about what you were doing before COVID hit as far as data governance and the current state?
Sure. Yeah, as I shared earlier in the conversation, data governance was a little bit of a laggard in terms of our adoption, our awareness, our understanding, and even our investments. I used to use the example of counting births to get resonation with a lot of folks. How did we count births? Was that one baby, multiple babies? Was that in an ambulance, in our ER? Was that in a car on the way there? There's a lot of different interpretations that come up in play, and that was always get a little bit of snickering. But it really, quite frankly, wasn't until we had asked all of our 12 hospitals to report out on their bed occupancy so that we could report back to the governor during the height of our COVID, where we quickly realized, and our leaders realized, that we weren't actually all talking from the same song sheet. We were looking at our bed capacity in very different ways. And we quickly used data governance and established some standards around what people were defining as beds. Was that a staffed bed, an occupied bed, a physical room that may not have even had a bed but could have cared for a patient? Was it an ICU type bed? Was it a med-surg bed that could be converted to an ICU bed? How do we count beds in our PACU and things like that? And that example immediately resonated. We sort of stumbled a little bit in partnering with other organizations. And that was one of the catalysts that drove home our leaders and our businesses' appreciation and desire to quickly develop a data governance solution and program that we could have confidence in. We didn't have time to check the quality of the data that we were being given to the business. And so now we've got our portal up and running. We're very excited about that. We've got our initial data sets and data assets loaded into that. We're getting use on a daily basis. People are looking at it for reports, looking for dashboards, or looking at it to understand the definitions. We put a little play on words here, call it our Einstein dashboard. We wanted to pat ourselves on the back and thank Mr. Einstein for the use of his name. And it's been quite successful in initial adoption. We're actually at the point where we're being asked to load more and more assets and confirm more and more metrics inside of our tool faster than we're able to go. And so that's a place that if you had asked me 12 months ago, I would have told you that would be the holy grail that the business was driving and demanding that we had more assets under management in our data governance program. And here we are today. We need to ensure that we are standardizing how the business is being run, and this is the best way that we've been able to do that.
Yeah, in your introductory comments, Mike, you had mentioned that there had been some prior starts at data governance, and data governance as a label perhaps wasn't the best perceived thing in the organization. What got you, pre-COVID, what got you started in the data governance world? And I think you've covered how everybody now fully appreciates the role of data governance. But pre-COVID, you had already started on your data governance journey. What broke the inertia of all the bad things people thought about data governance?
I think it was actually a simple thing. I think data governance for us, at least, and for the leaders prior to my role, really talked about it as a conceptual thing. It was a discussion. It was sort of theoretical. It was in paper. It was disagreeing on, for us, it was units of service. What are we counting? How are we aligning that? Who can control that? It was really not stored in a central location. It was a lot of bantering back and forth. And quite honestly, it was because we leveraged this tool to quickly show them, and people will be able to understand, well, when I approve this metric, people are able to see that. This is where the fruits of my labor are going. And it was through the realization and the recognition that the work that they were going to do and making this key decisions around definitions, business definitions and technical definitions, that allowed our end users to understand why they were going to spend time, why we were asking them to spend time to approve some of the products that we had deployed, to approve some of the things that we were loading into our portal. And once they realized that, there was something tangible for them to see, touch, hear, smell, whatever that happens to be, we started to get that adoption. And I think for us, that's what it took to move our organization forward.
Yeah, it's interesting because, as Informatica, we talk about the concept of just enough data governance, because those old data governance initiatives used to be very heavy-handed, top-down. You needed some bureaucratic committee to tell the business what their data meant. And, the new style is much more collaborative. And when we talk about just enough data governance, I think you guys realized that with the COVID crisis, right? That gave you an immediate set of data to govern that everybody cared about, which I think that focus, like going back to your earlier point, never let a good crisis go to waste. Certainly being able to focus your efforts on data governance and get to value quickly was part of that.
Absolutely.
So let's move on to what other things we have not touched on yet that you think are key accomplishments or were important in helping you deliver value to the organization.
I think one of the things that I think I've touched on a couple of these already, but one that I haven't talked about is how are we thinking about integrating historical data with real-time data? How are we looking at things like PPE to say, here's what our historical use is, here's what we have on site, how do we deploy real-time usage so that we know one of our nursing units is getting low on PPE, how can we make immediate responsive decisions to move PPE from one location to another? And that's really been something that we've been putting our heads around, what that looks like, how we do that technically, what's the best way to deploy that, how do we ensure that we're combining in an effective way what our real-time data needs are so that we can trigger business processes or clinical alerts for people to respond and react to. That's something that we have started down that path on, but I know we've got a lot to go in that journey. And it's something that I think is ultimately going to be how our predictive models and our machine learning models are going to be deployed. A second thing that we've been really focused on is interagency or external organizational exchanging of information. At the height of our COVID, we were actively talking, collaborating in very positive ways with a number of entities inside Ohio on what the surge was going to look like for us. We all quickly realized that we needed to make sure we were using the same definitions and the same types of data like length of stay to ensure that when we were building our models, we were comparing, I would say, apples to apples. And that's something that we know we're going to need to accelerate both the sharing of our data and the bringing of data in. How do we ensure that we're talking about it the same way? How do we ensure that we're sharing those standards with external agencies in a self-service way? Can we create things like portals where we use API integration to share that data so they can see that types of definition? Those are all really important things that we need to focus in on. As I continue the supply chain conversation, I think I shared earlier that that's going to be a very important focus for us. When we talk to our supply chain leaders, we really need to get beyond just the next step of delivery. For those of you who are not aware, there was a national shortage of saline for IV bags. If you went to any distributor, they eventually were getting it from the same manufacturer down in Puerto Rico. And the hurricane of last fall really decimated their supply and their capabilities. And so we want to find a way that we can get beyond the distributors of our key supply needs. How do we go up that supply chain cycle and that logistical train to really get to the source and help to inform us on where we may have alerts and where we may have opportunities? How can we combine that real-time data back into our historical usage and our models? It's definitely something that we're really focused on.
And Mike, one of the things you talk about is, the external data that you created or that you needed to collect and integrate, the data from state agencies and social agencies. You previously mentioned that you've got a data lake in the cloud. It sounds like that, the whole idea of hybrid data integration between cloud, on-prem, external third party, all of those things, is one of the key capabilities to be able to be agile and respond to the uncertainty that you were facing. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I would very much agree with that.
And then the other piece that you have talked about previously is this combining historical and real-time data at the dashboard level. Can you comment on that and specifically address how much of that do you see being pushed out in a self-service manner? What's the role of your team and your data science team in being able to do that sort of combination?
I think, and I could be wrong here, I think that's probably more of the future in terms of what we start to focus in on. I think a lot of the historical stuff is good to know. Wouldn't it be nice to know? But I think a lot of that's going to serve our predictions and our focus areas and our alerts going forward. And I think the real-time data need is going to become primarily what we use as an organization to drive our business. And we'll use the historical data for benchmarking, for alerts, for maybe business rules that we need to apply. And so my team is really focused in on how do we technically do that? What are the right tools that we need to put forth to be able to ensure that we're able to do that in a scalable way? The dashboards that we've deployed for COVID and our back to business leadership teams have really been driven in a real-time way. We're not looking at showing them a dashboard from yesterday or the day before on our data. We need real-time usage on how many surgeries are being scheduled right now. What does that look like? How does that integrate in with our PPE? So as an example, sure, we can get our surgery information from our EMR and it can show us our schedules and things like that. But then how do we show a lens that says, here's what our workforce capabilities are, and here's what our PPE capabilities are in that space. And so it's that aggregation of those real-time data sets with historical trends that are going to become really important for us.
That makes a lot of sense. So we've covered a lot of these topics already, but what are the specific things that you see as forward-looking challenges on the horizon?
We want to be more Amazon-like. I think Amazon is like putting the consumer at the front of everything and designing a consumer experience, and I believe we need to do that inside of healthcare. We need to ensure that we are giving an optimal experience. We need to use AI and machine learning to drive a lot of opportunities. We need to use those to ensure that we're helping to diagnose clinically and operationally what's best for our patients and what's best for the community. We really want to focus on employee safety. That's been one of our key tenets throughout the entire COVID process. How do we ensure we're protecting our employees, taking care of our employees, both actually with things like PPE, and then mentally with some of the things that we have going on. We've been doing lots of engagement surveys, using that data to match up with patient safety to see how things are going. If we see a nursing unit that's maybe struggling with some burnout or some mental fatigue, are we starting to see correlation between patient satisfaction surveys, and how can we use engagement opportunities with that unit to ensure we don't see dissatisfied customers? So those are some of the challenges that we have on our horizon that really get us thinking about how do we transition to be more than just a traditional healthcare provider.
Right. And you've spoken, at length about consumer engagement and how you're partnering with your healthcare professionals and your customers around being able to get these analytics products to them quickly. If we move just as we start to wind down, we talk about getting data from third parties and that being one of the new things that you're doing. How comfortable are you as we think of, the new Health and Human Services interoperability rules and all of those things? How comfortable are you that you trust the data that you're getting from third parties?
That's a really good question, and I would say it depends. Obviously, there are basic interoperability standards that exist that we participate in that shares data back with our EMR data. But where we're experiencing is it goes beyond that. How are we ensuring that the data that we're getting from external organizations that aren't on an interoperable framework, or consumer-oriented organizations, community organizations, how are we partner with homeless shelters to do COVID testing and the data that we're getting back from them? And the reality is we've got to work through where that trust index is and what that looks like for us. As we bring in data organization, today we've used a sort of a mental trust index that defines where it's coming from and our confidence level and understanding how they've captured that data. Have we even had a conversation with them on what that looks like? We've got a questionnaire that we go through to basically understand what's coming our way, how they calculate it, so that we can call out any potential issues downstream. The same thing goes with outbound data. We are being asked to share our information more than we ever have with the spike of COVID. How do we provide glossaries for those partners? How do we have conversations on maybe we looked at the definition this way, they looked at it the other way, and we might want to use their definition. Does that mean we're going to add a new data set? Does that mean we're going to add a new data index around that, what that looks like? And so we believe that it's more than just EMR interoperability in the future, because as we engage more and more with disease management tools and technologies and digital technologies, we're going to need to ensure that we have a robust data governance strategy for external and internal data.
Yeah, that all makes sense. I mean, you said earlier that so much of this data is equal in importance to what's in your EHR today, and so being interoperable has to be a key capability. So let's bring it home, Mike. If we summarize your keys to success, what would your quick summary be?
I'd say be a little rebellious. For me, I've done a good job of cultivating a balanced reputation of delivery, but also pushing the envelope. And so, there's never going to be a perfect use case. There's never going to be a perfect customer that understands where we need to go. So I think as leaders in the analytics space, whether that's in front-end analytics, back-end data management, data governance, data science, be a little rebellious. Combine that quick win opportunity with field of dreams. If you keep asking along the way for every step, it's going to be a long journey. And so we've been able to find ways to be creative in getting the organization to put trust in us, trust in what we're delivering, and trust that we are building what's in their best needs. And so it requires a little rebellion, quite frankly, and I sort of enjoy that. I think aligned leadership is also probably the most valued thing that I have for Ohio Health. I am truly blessed to have a senior leadership team, a CEO, a COO, a CFO, who understands what we need and how we need to operate as a business. We started our COVID command center weeks before the governor for Ohio started to make announcements around what we were going to do in this space. Prior to us, and the economy opened back up, we started a second command center around what that back to business is going to look like for us. And having that aligned leadership and having a leadership team that builds a management system to make decisions, to enable decision making at lower levels of the organization has been absolutely key to us being as successful as we have been. And then trust. You got to have trust. I walked into our executive team and said, hey, I want to do this thing. I know you guys don't understand it, but I need you to trust me. And it was because of our prior successes and the use cases that we've built. The organization said, we hear you, we agree with you, we'll put some trust in you and then show us the quick wins after that. And that's going to be your keys to success.
Fantastic, Mike, and I think those you hit on all of those in summary as we went through the discussion. For everybody, please submit your questions that we can answer. If we've only got about 6 minutes or so to answer some questions, if we don't get to your question, we will reply one-on-one after the event's over. But let's go ahead and start with the first question that we've got, and of course it deals with data governance and privacy and legal. So, Mike, this will be for you, of course. How would you approach a legal team when they are reluctant to implement just enough data governance in organizations where the belief that a bureaucratic process is required to protect the organization from PHI breaches?
Phenomenal question, actually. If you could visibly see my smile as I was listening to Richard, you'd appreciate it. The reality is this is a big deal for healthcare organizations. And we do have a legal and compliance and security organization that do a great job in ensuring we're protecting our organization from risk. But I think the way I look at this is actually to flip their mentality, and they are actually my biggest supporters of our data governance program. There's a couple of things that I would do. One, there are actually tools that can be put in place that can be used to help govern things like outbound data extracts and having workflows and business rules in place that ensure and would bring confidence to folks from your legal and compliance teams. So I would start to educate them on the technical tools and the capabilities that exist, and those tools really partner alongside some of the existing and traditional data governance tools. The second thing I would do is I would work very closely with the senior leaders of your legal team and your compliance organization for them to understand what your intent is with data governance and why loading that data in and then enabling it is actually better for them. Because I think the bureaucratic process that you described is certainly one that has been successful in those types of cases. But there's something to be said about knowing exactly where data is coming from, who's looked at it, what it means, and how that's being used. And when you're able to answer questions for those teams and your internal audit team as they want to know who's looked at stuff, having these types of tools and a mature program may and should actually make them feel more confident in what you're doing.
And gentlemen, Mike, thank you so much. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Mark.
Well, I was just going to ask one other question, which is all we have time for, and then both of you can wrap for us. But Mike, what would you advise on the predictive analytics journey, or that element of the journey specifically? What would you advise fellow healthcare IT leaders as they move forward in terms of what they need to do as they go into predictive analytics? You were very eloquent in some of the experiences that you shared, but what would your key couple pieces of advice be for other colleagues?
I think I would say brace yourself and brace your organization that function is going to fail a lot. Our predictive models around COVID, to be honest with you, I think we developed 15 different variations, and 15 were wrong. But that's not to say that the capability and function weren't great, or there weren't a lot of insights to be driven off of it. But the ability, the skill set, the knowledge, the experience to develop these models is not something that you just flip the light switch and you have. You've got to build that up, and data science and predictive models, they're intended to be guides. They're intended to be things to help inform decision-making, sort of fit into those parameters. And so I would say be prepared for that and then manage to that, because I think that if you're expecting a predictive model to be 100% accurate and to be critical into a clinical workflow, I think you're going to leave yourself kind of a recipe for failure. And so when we brought our data science teams together and we started building our COVID predictive models, we openly talked about them like the hurricane. I actually showed a picture of a hurricane model from last year that had 15 different lines going in 15 different directions, and then the hurricane went none of them, right? So just getting their hands wrapped around this being a journey versus this being a capability that you just flip on and off.
Terrific advice. We just have a minute. So Mike and Richard, would you just like to say one or two words to summarize, and then we'll conclude?
I'll let Mike go first.
First off, I appreciate everybody joining us today. This is certainly something that has been a journey for us. By no means do I think that we've got it all figured out. We're on a journey of learning ourselves. And so I'd love any feedback or ideas that you all have and things that you're proud of, so that we could learn together. So I thank you for your time and really appreciate it.
Wonderful. Richard?
And thank you, Mike. From my perspective, first and foremost, thank you to Mike Ross for his participation and the insights that he shared. I think everybody can appreciate that our discussion has really been focused on outcomes and process and value to Ohio Health and their community, not about Informatica and not about our products. If you go back to Mike's intro architecture diagram, you can see where Informatica plays. We do data integration. We have master data management. We're essential to the data governance things and data quality. So hopefully everybody can appreciate that, our intent was to really focus on the value from a business leader doing these sorts of things so you could get the maximum insight from Mike. So with that, Mike, I'd just say thank you again for all of your insights you shared.
Thank you both so very much, Mike and Richard, for this excellent webinar. I'd like to thank our sponsor, Informatica, for making today's program possible. And finally, I'd like to thank everyone in our audience for joining us. We hope you'll join us again in the future for another healthcare innovation webinar. This concludes today's presentation. Thank you both, presenters. Thank you, Informatica. Thank you to our audience, and have a great day.